I don't really like this style that much, but now I actually have a ton of respect for him for sticking with it. I need to warn of a gore warning on this Darth Vader drawing, but it's absolutely awesome. And when I first looked at this piece, my exact reaction was like, ooh. Welcome back to Illustrator Reacts. It's been a little while since I made the last one of these back in March of 2020, and a lot of stuff has changed for me in the last 5 years. For one thing, my art has significantly improved since then, as I've been a full-time art and storytelling YouTuber for these last 5 years. And I think I might have more interesting insights into other people's art nowadays, now that I've been full-time making pretty much whatever I want to make, in the style I want to work in, versus when I'd made the original Illustrator React series, and my career to that point had largely been being an illustrator and animator for other people, making what they wanted me to make. So I'm actually really excited to try another one of these videos after all these years, and most of the people I'm going to cover are people I didn't talk about back in the original series, but I do actually want to start with someone that I have talked about before, because he put out some covers recently that got a lot of people talking, and I think my perspective on his art has changed a lot since I last talked about him.
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
Now, before I launch into the main stuff I want to talk about with Frank Miller, I just want to ask people a question. This very iconic Dark Knight Returns cover that he did, which way do you think Batman is facing? We can only see his silhouette, so there's no objectively clear way he's supposed to be facing, but personally, I always saw it as he's facing away from us. And people were arguing about this online a little while ago, and allegedly Frank Miller's intention was actually that Batman is facing towards us. Obviously, it doesn't really matter either way, it's a great cover either way, but I was just curious what other people think. And anyway, like I said, I have covered Frank Miller before. He's done some of the most iconic Batman images of all time. He's done some really iconic Wolverine imagery as well back in his earlier days, and that was back when he was working closer to the house style at Marvel. House style being a general term for the most common style to be used at a certain company. Generally a style seen to have more broad appeal. Like I'd say maybe still currently Jim Lee would be the standard for the house style at DC nowadays, with people like Ivan Reyes having a similar style but still getting a bit of his own style in there. But when Frank Miller did start doing The Dark Knight Returns, he did start stepping into more of his own original style. But then when he did The Dark Knight Strikes Again, which I talked about more extensively in the last episode, he started shifting into another style that, when I talked about him before, I said this was just a big swing and a miss, a style experiment that went wrong. But the thing is, he's stuck with this style since then, and that was evident in this Ghost Rider Wolverine cover that he did recently. And I'll be honest, I don't really like this style that much, but now I actually have a ton of respect for him for sticking with it, despite the fact that lots of people don't love it. And he's done a bunch of other covers like this. He did this Blade cover here, he did a Deadpool and Wolverine cover, these are all fairly recent. He did this Moon Knight cover, he did a Fantastic Four cover, but going back to the Wolverine one, it's clear that he wants to be doing the kind of style that he did in The Dark Knight Strikes Again. It is weirder and it has less mass appeal than the style he used for things like Wolverine or The Dark Knight Returns, but the reason that I'm glad he's sticking with it is because it shows that he's willing to make what he wants to make regardless of what other people think. And there are people that do like this style of his more than his old style. There's this term I've heard called golden handcuffs, where someone gets a job that pays really, really well, and then they realize soon after that they don't actually like that job. They might even hate it, but they feel stuck in it because they want to keep making that large amount of money. And that kind of applies to this too. Frank Miller proved he could do stuff that had mass appeal, and he could have felt like he was stuck in that and had to keep doing it because it's what other people wanted. But instead, despite backlash from people that liked his old style and want him to go back to it, he's stuck with making the thing that he wants to make. A weird style with less mass appeal, but does still have its fans. And I'll be honest, there are actually some of these that I like. I'm really not a fan of the Deadpool Wolverine cover, but I do actually kind of like this Blade cover, even though it doesn't logically make sense, like how he's holding his blades. His hands should be tilted sideways so that the hilt of the blade can be going through his hands. Instead, it's kind of like he's holding the sword like this, and the hilt is going up into his palm. But still, I don't know, I look at it and I'm still kind of like, this is kind of cool. I like the way that the swords are framing him and the title. Again, I still like his old Wolverine stuff better, but I don't mind this. And I'm happy for the people that do like this style he's working in. Because there's plenty of artists out there working in more conventional styles. If you don't like what he's doing now, just go follow them. So yeah, Frank Miller, I don't really love the style he's working in now. Some of it's kind of cool, but I absolutely salute him for sticking with it. Now, Absolute Batman is a recent Batman storyline about an alternate universe Batman. I haven't read it, but I believe it's that he's a civil engineer, I don't think he's rich, and he's also an absolute unit of a man. Like, in his Batman suit, I think he's 7 feet tall or something, and I don't know, a ton of pounds, probably like 400 pounds or something, and he's being hunted by an alternate version of Alfred Pennyworth, I think is how the story goes. Again, I haven't read it yet. I probably will because Scott Snyder wrote it, not to be confused with the filmmaker Zack Snyder, but Scott Snyder is one of my favorite comic book writers of all time. But the reason I wanted to bring it up isn't just because it looks really cool, and the main art for it, done by Nick Dragotta, is pretty awesome looking, especially in these first 2 covers I got up. I love how they look. The high contrast on the second one with the yellow in the background. The pose Batman's in, it's very imposing. I really love that. But again, the reason I want to talk about this is more because it was a big storyline that DC was putting out, so they got a bunch of different artists that I think are really awesome to do a bunch of different variant covers. So I want to go through some of those, and one thing I do want to keep in mind, as much as I love all of these covers that I'm showing, is that Absolute Batman is supposed to be an absolute unit. He's supposed to be massive. Unless, of course, that's just a thing the internet has latched onto to talk about, and it wasn't actually an important thing stated to these variant cover artists about how they should represent this character. So even if they don't do it, that's not necessarily their fault, but hey, it's something to talk about as we look through some cool art. So we go on to the next one, which, we've got one here by Frank Miller, and don't love this one as much as I loved that Blade cover that he did. Batman's looking a little bit like a turtle to me in this one. I would say it's kind of hard to tell with this one because he's so hunched over, but I would say this one doesn't quite sell the absolute unit thing for me. Then in the next one, we've got one by Clay Mann, which this one definitely does, I would say. He looks huge. And even look at this tiny little knife that he's got stuck in his arm that's probably supposed to be the size of a regular knife, but because it's in this gigantic Batman's arm, it just looks like a tiny little knife. So Clay Mann absolutely selling it. I love the color and the streaks. It's very menacing and intimidating. And then we move over to this one by Liam Sharp, not to be confused with good old Benny Shop. And I do really like how this cover looks, but again, Batman looks big, but not bigger than regular Batman. I mean, Batman has tons of different sizes, but I would say this one's not quite selling the gigantic absolute unit Batman to me. Still, super cool, love the pose. Then we go on to this one, that is by Dan Panosian, I believe. And I would say, again, Batman looks big, but I could see this being the regular Batman as well. And then we've got this one from Mark Brooks, getting bigger. I like how nice and chunky Batman's thighs are here. He's definitely not skipping leg day. And I love the cape swirling up. I don't really know enough about this storyline to know what the heck is up with Batman's cape and some of the weapons that he uses in this. I know he's got this axe here that's kind of shaped like his just absolute rectangle Batman logo. But anyway, this one's very cool. Reminds me a lot of Batman the Animated Series. Then we've got this one by Javier Fernandez, which is an intentional homage to Akira, an absolute classic anime that's referenced very frequently both in comics and in animation and filmmaking. We recently got the Akira slide referenced in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Shadow the Hedgehog does it. Like, that shot of the motorcycle slide has been redone in so many different things over the years. But anyway, this one's awesome. I would say with how broad his shoulders are, yeah, it's kind of selling the absolute unit Batman. But then we have this one here, who's by Sean Murphy. I think I talked about him in one of the earlier Illustrator Reacts episodes. I absolutely love this cover. I think it is, that's not, when I say absolutely, I'm not trying to do a pun. I wonder how many times I've done that. But anyway, I really, really love this Batman cover, the way Batman's framed by the buildings in the back that are basically just black silhouettes with little streaks of detail to them. The colors, I think, are done by Mike Spicer, and they're absolutely gorgeous. Oh my gosh, I probably do that a lot today. But anyway, The thing is, as much as I as much as I really love this cover, it doesn't sell to me that this is absolute Batman. It kind of just looks like regular Batman to me, like the way he would have drawn him in Batman White Knight or something like that. So I thought this Sean Murphy one was going to be my favorite, but then I saw this one. It was a variant cover for Absolute Batman #2, and I didn't recognize the style, and when I looked into it, I realized I wasn't familiar with this artist, Daniel Warren Johnson, with actually colors by Mike Spicer as well. And this one isn't quite as flashy as some of the other ones, but the thing that really stuck out to me is when I first looked at this piece, my exact reaction was like, ooh, ooh! Like, I look at Batman first because he's the highest point of contrast with his head is just completely black, and then he's got his 2 white eyes, and that's contrasted by the bright yellow behind him. And so I look at him first, and then I notice all the dead or knocked out bodies behind him and on this building around him. I'm like, oh, that's cool, okay. Just the color division used through, there's some kind of light coming up at Batman from below the building, and it's at nighttime, so the people on top are very blacked out, and the darkness is represented by a faded purplish blue kind of color. And I just think that was such a good example of drawing me to something and then having me notice the next thing. And I will also note, well, I absolutely love this cover. I do think it's a good example of, if you zoom in and look at the skulls on these people's heads, they're really like silly, tiny, scratched in super quick details because they're a small detail that people aren't going to be looking at and analyzing, and Johnson was going to need to draw a whole bunch of them. They're just, you know, some of them don't have facial features. This guy kind of looks like he's melting right into the ground, and a lot of them are just like really quick scribbles of what a skull kind of looks like, and it still works because they're just a small detail. But anyway, in learning about Daniel Warren Johnson by seeing this piece, it made me want to look into him more, so now we're going to do a whole section about him. Now this is where this video will get a little bit more react-y because, as I said, Daniel Warren Johnson isn't someone I'm super familiar with, but when I went looking into his art, the first thing I saw was this piece. It stuck out to me right away, and I was just like, love it, because I really love, I've probably talked about this in the older episodes, but when something is all black and white with one single pop of color, and I think the way that it's used here is really nicely too. The red helps frame our main character here, who's going up against a big creature that's like a monstrous version of Krampus. I mean, Krampus is already monstrous, but even more so. And then helping us lead from that high contrast point where the red is framing him, his scarf is kind of swooping up through Krampus's body, helping lead us up to the character's head, and then we get a look at his gnarly, creepy looking head with all those horns and the, I was gonna say bug eyes, maybe, I don't know if that's quite the right term, but anyway, then we've got the little text up there, Merry Christmas from the Krampus, and just everything about this piece really struck me. It drew my eye immediately, even in a big sea of different images that I saw when I searched his name. Next, Optimus Prime here kind of caught my eye, seems like a pretty iconic image of Optimus Prime, and this one doesn't blow me away or anything, but I do really like it. We've got a nice low perspective looking up at Optimus, helping him look even bigger. He's got some nice little bullet wounds and dents in him. Cool stuff, but then I really like this piece that I have no idea what the context of it is, but it's a really nice, something that I've actually done recently. I think we're in 3-point perspective here. The ground is kind of angled in a way that just makes it feel more dynamic. I did it recently to help make an image look a little bit creepier. I used the 3-point perspective tools in Sketchbook Pro, but had the horizon line tilted a little bit. Just kind of give it like, you'd call it a Dutch angle in filmmaking, where the camera is tilted. You saw a lot of that in the first Thor movie. And we've got our character here that's gesturing up to this wrestling arena or something like that. And then the 3-point perspective is also kind of helping lead us up in that direction as well, and there's even a staircase going up to it. Just lots of stuff helping guide our eye to that part of the piece. But then the stuff that really struck me, and I need to warn of a gore warning on this Darth Vader drawing, but it's absolutely awesome. And I think a bunch of these were commissions that Daniel Warren Johnson did, but this Darth Vader piece where it's just he's literally blasting the face off of someone, and this is the kind of epic Star Wars stuff that you're never going to see from Disney. I'm not like a Disney Star Wars hater or anything, but I doubt we'd ever see something like this in a Star Wars movie, and it looks so cool. Like, the impact, you can really feel the force just blasting the guy's face away, and everyone else around him is just being eviscerated by Darth Vader. And he's got another Darth Vader one that I absolutely love too here, where Darth Vader, super high point of contrast with him in the middle there. We've got sort of a 1 point perspective look as everyone is getting either blasted away from him, or maybe he's just torn up this cockpit. Maybe he's just blasting the Force at people. I don't know what exactly he's doing, but he's eviscerating people. We've got a Godzilla piece here that's pretty sweet as well. Godzilla being lit from below. Anytime you want to make something look a little bit creepier, light it from below. It just feels really unnatural. Something that I like that he did here that I don't know if this is something that's widely done, but I know for me, buildings were difficult to learn how to draw. For lots of people, they tend to be. But in regards to where buildings meet the street, a lot of the time when I have to do that, I'll cover it with like debris or cloud streaks or just something so that I don't have to show the spot where the building actually touches the ground. And in this piece, he's kind of done that as well. It's always nice seeing an artist who's better than me do some kind of little cheap trick that I do as well. So Daniel Warren Johnson, hadn't heard of him before today, but I'm very glad I know him now. Now, I'll be honest, with Emerson Tung here, I might not have much more interesting to say than just, oh. And also, technically, this isn't comic book art, but I kind of want to branch out with the series anyway. I'm thinking maybe a concept art episode, a kids comics episode to cover things like Bone and Goosebumps comics from back in the day. But anyway, this guy, Emerson Tung, was sent to me by a subscriber, Griffin Goodman, to illustratorreacts@gmail.com. If you have suggestions, it makes it a lot easier for me if you send some actual high-resolution art for me to look at. So, like this, you might get a shout-out if you send your request there. I'll have it linked in the description. But every single one of the mech creature being things that I saw in Emerson Tung's Tankhead series, which is an art book that's out, just made me go, oh, it's so cool. This Godzilla sort of looking one was specifically sent to me, and it just immediately made me go, this is someone who clearly knows many different elements of what tanks look like in real life and different military ships and equipment, and has worked that into the designs for these creatures to give them a real sense of grounded realism despite them not being rendered to look realistic. And he has just got so many of these. There's so many different creatures. This lobster one that looks like a submarine is such a cool idea and so well executed. This flying ship sort of one is beautiful. Just there's such a massive roster of them, and obviously there's probably tons more in the book, so if you like this, I think there's a very good chance I'm going to be getting this book. But there's just so many of them, and then he's even got like these more humanoid looking ones. I don't know if these are also from the Tankhead series, but they're just so cool looking, more medieval sort of vibe to them, while still being futuristic. It doesn't even feel like the right word. It doesn't feel like steampunk either, but you know, by explaining that, I'm probably getting to the right sort of ballpark of what these remind me of. And back when I did Illustrator Reacts in the first place, I probably didn't draw any mech kind of stuff back then, because mech armors and machines like this can be really difficult to draw because of the rigid shapes and how the different pieces move. Like when you're drawing humans and animals and stuff like that, we have fleshier bits that bend and warp and shift, and metal doesn't really do that. So you have to think more about how the perspective of each different piece looks when it's bent and turned, and how the different pieces interact with each other. Along with that, it can be really difficult doing the reflectiveness of different metals, which one thing I noticed is a lot of these aren't super reflective metals. They're more like a matte tank sort of look, which helps mean there doesn't need to be extra details added, because if you've got a really reflective metal, then you suddenly need to start drawing in the reflections of the complicated stuff around the character. Like if a human is standing next to a very reflective metal Iron Man suit or something, you're gonna see some reflections of that person in the Iron Man suit. If extra reflections were added to these, they'd probably get way too detailed, because they're already very detailed. I have practiced doing mech armor stuff more over the years, turning lots of different pop culture characters into mech armors, had a whole series doing that, and I do think I significantly improved over time, but I definitely have not gotten to this level yet. This is epic. Now, I honestly had so much more I wanted to talk about today. I really wanted to get to Marvel Rivals, the game concept art, versus the comic that's being put out, because I have been obsessed with the art for Marvel Rivals for almost a year now, since they started putting out trailers and concept art and stuff like that. It even heavily influenced my own art for my book that I recently put out, Vigilance, which is an interconnected anthology about the competitors of a superpowered sports fighting league, available now on Amazon if you're interested. But anyway, I'll get to that in another episode, I guess, because I want to finish up today with someone that was suggested in a comment section, Kei Urana, who I read the first volume of her series, Gakiachuta, last night, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing right, because I've never pronounced anything wrong in this series ever.
Luffy having
Yes.
But anyway, I started reading this book, and I really like it. I'm definitely going to keep reading the series. And the colors on the front cover immediately struck me for the first volume, and when I went to the first page, the colors struck me there too. I was like, ooh, this is stylish and rough and beautiful. And then I moved on to the next page, and I was like, ooh, this color is really hitting me. I love this. And then I go to the next page, and I was like, oh no, where did it go? I mean, I should have seen that coming. A lot of the time, manga will have a few pages colored to start, and then it'll go to the usual black and white. I have honestly read way more manga in the last few years than I have stuff from Marvel or DC, but one thing I do tend to miss is the color. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with the first few pages. I was just like, I was really vibing with the color style in here. But anyway, as I started reading, I was like, okay, this is cool. You know, nothing super big standing out to me. We do end up getting some really dynamic stuff, but first, something I noticed is that the environments in it were very rigid and stiff, and it was kind of contrasting nicely with the characters, who had much thicker outlines to them and were a bit more rough. But it was hitting me a little bit like, those backgrounds look a little bit stiff, which is a hypocritical thing for me to say. But I was like, this isn't really vibing with me so much. But then I kind of realized why as we got a few more pages in. The main location that the story takes place in is divided into the hoity-toity rich people neighborhood where we're starting the story in, and then there's the slums on the other side of a big wall. So when I was looking at the stuff that was very rigid, that was in the rich neighborhood where a lot of the people that live there are very stiff and rigid. And then as soon as we switch over to the slums, I was like, oh, there we've got some flavor in the environments. All right, I'm liking this. It's rougher. You can really feel that it's a grimier neighborhood. And so that kind of contextualized why the backgrounds felt a little bit stiff earlier in the story. It kind of helped sell the feel that she was going for. But jumping back a little bit earlier in the story, there is some really cool dynamic imagery. Like, she's got a really good sense of designing movement. I love the garbage bags being thrown at us. There's a really cool panel of forced perspective of the character leaping around bullets that are spiraling towards him. That was all beautifully done. I thought it was super cool. I really like this piece here of how the text is helping sell the perspective, leading us in towards the character who's running towards us. And then another thing that I really noted about this artist is she's really good at having panels or pages that just hit different compared to the other stuff that you've seen. Like this panel of half this character's face as he's giving someone a dirty look. I was like, ooh, when I came to that page, it kind of jump scared me. And then we had this page where everything was black and the inks were done in white, and I felt like when I look at this page, I can hear a heartbeat happening. And it was a very tense moment in the story. Then there was just some really cool images of creatures chasing down our main character. And one thing that was kind of nice in reading it, this isn't really a critique on the art, but more on the storytelling. There were a few things early on where I was like, well, this is very predictable, and some of this dialogue is very blatantly just dumping exposition on us. It's not being stated in a very realistic way. And yet, even though I acknowledged that those things were happening, I was like, I do not care in the slightest, because this story has really grabbed me. And that's an important thing to remember for your own stuff. Your stories don't have to be perfect. You can use tropes. Having mistakes or flaws or having to dump some exposition on people in some places, it's not going to ruin a story for most people. Lots of people won't even notice. If you've got compelling characters or something really cool about the story, the good stuff is probably going to keep people's attention more than the bad stuff is going to distract them. So I read this, I'm super invested, and I'm excited to read the next volume. I guess that's all I've got for you today, but like I said, I have a bunch of other people I'm ready to talk about, and you can send requests at illustratorreacts@gmail.com, or leave them in the comments, but you're more likely to get a shout out if you send high-resolution art for me to look at to that email address. If you're new to this channel from this series, and you like the snippets of my art style that you've seen, and you like things like audiobooks, you might want to check out one of my ongoing stories that I have. where I'm basically releasing chapters of audiobooks with me drawing the art for the book. I put out videos on Mondays and Fridays, and the best story to jump in on is probably Starseed Psyche. There will be a new episode coming out on Friday, but you can start the playlist at the beginning. It's not connected to any of my other storylines, but Fear of the Demon Hunters is also a good one to jump in on if you like more monsters and, you know, a kind of creepier sort of story. It is connected to my wider Multiverse Tales series, which has been going for like 4 years or something, but I also wrote it with a new character as the lead so that you could jump in without needing to know anything else to enjoy the storyline. I'll have both those playlists linked in the description, but I've got a bunch of different series. You can poke around my homepage. And besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote I read this week by a man named Howard Thurman, who said, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because the world needs people who have come alive." I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.